It was a Thursday afternoon, sometime around 4 o'clock, when everything changed inside the grand lobby of the Riverside Hotel. The sun was coming through the tall glass windows, making golden patterns on the marble floor. People were walking around slowly, some checking in, some heading out, and a few just sitting on the velvet couches with cups of coffee in their hands. In the corner of this beautiful lobby stood a black grand piano. It was old but well taken care of, polished so perfectly that you could see your own reflection in it. And sitting at that piano was a man in his early 50s, playing soft melodies that floated through the air like a gentle breeze. His name was Mr. Lawrence, and he had been the hotel's resident pianist for nearly 12 years. Before that, he had traveled the world, performing in concert halls across Europe and Asia. He had played for presidents, for royalty, for audiences that paid hundreds of dollars just to hear him touch the keys. But those days were behind him now. A car accident 10 years ago had injured his left hand, and though he recovered enough to play, he was never quite the same. So he found peace here, in this quiet hotel, playing for strangers who barely noticed him. On this particular Thursday, Mr. Lawrence was finishing up his afternoon session. He played a soft piece, something slow and calm, letting the final notes hang in the air before gently lifting his fingers from the keys. A few guests clapped politely. Most didn't even look up from their phones. He smiled to himself. He was used to it by now. As he reached for the glass of water sitting on a small table beside the piano, he noticed something from the corner of his eye. A small figure, standing just a few feet away from the piano, completely still. It was a boy. He looked about 7 or 8 years old, thin and small for his age. His clothes were simple, a plain blue t-shirt and dark pants that looked like they had been washed too many times. His shoes were old, the rubber peeling slightly at the edges, but none of that mattered. What caught Mr. Lawrence's attention were the boy's eyes. They were locked on the piano, not on Mr. Lawrence. Not on the fancy lobby or the rich people walking by. Just the piano. The boy stared at it the way some children stare at toy stores or candy shops. There was hunger in his eyes. A deep, quiet longing that seemed too heavy for someone so young. Mr. Lawrence watched him for a moment, curious. The boy didn't move. He just stood there. His small hands hanging at his sides, fingers twitching slightly, as if they wanted to reach out and touch the keys. Then, from across the lobby, a woman's voice called out in a loud whisper. "Tommy, Tommy, come here right now." The boy flinched but didn't move. Mr. Lawrence turned to see a woman hurrying toward them. She was wearing a gray uniform, the kind the hotel housekeepers wore. Her hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and there were dark circles under her eyes. She looked tired, the kind of tired that comes from working too many hours and sleeping too few. She reached the boy and grabbed his arm gently but firmly. "I told you to stay in the break room," she whispered, her voice full of worry. "You can't be out here. If the manager sees you, I could lose my job." The boy finally looked away from the piano. He looked up at his mother with those same intense eyes. "I just wanted to listen, Mama," he said softly. "Just for a little while." The woman sighed. There was no anger in her face, only exhaustion and something that looked like sadness. She glanced at Mr. Lawrence and quickly lowered her head. "I'm so sorry, sir," she said. "He wasn't bothering you, was he? He just loves music. I told him to stay inside. But he never listens when there's a piano nearby." Mr. Lawrence shook his head slowly. "He wasn't bothering me at all." The woman nodded, relieved, and began to pull the boy away. But the boy resisted. He turned back toward the piano one more time, and then he did something that surprised everyone. He spoke directly to Mr. Lawrence. "Can I play for a moment?" His voice was small but clear. There was no shyness in it, no hesitation. Just a simple, honest question. The woman's face turned pale. She pulled the boy closer and shook her head quickly. "Tommy, no, you can't just ask things like that. This isn't our piano. This is a hotel. We don't belong here." But the boy kept looking at Mr. Lawrence, waiting for an answer. Mr. Lawrence felt something stir inside his chest. He had heard this question before, many times over the years. Children at parties, students at schools. random strangers who wanted to show off. Most of the time, he politely said no. The piano was expensive. The hotel had rules. And honestly, most people who asked couldn't play more than a few clumsy notes anyway. But something about this boy was different. Maybe it was the way he looked at the piano, like it was the most important thing in the world. Maybe it was the way his fingers kept twitching, like they already knew what to do. Or maybe it was the sadness in his mother's eyes, the way she looked like she had spent her whole life apologizing for things that weren't her fault. Whatever the reason, Mr. Lawrence found himself saying something he hadn't planned to say. "Do you know how to play?" The woman answered before the boy could. "No, sir. He's never had a lesson in his life. We can't afford things like that. He just watches videos on my old phone sometimes. That's all. Please. I'm sorry for the trouble." She tried again to pull the boy away, but Mr. Lawrence raised his hand gently. "Wait," he said. The woman stopped. Mr. Lawrence looked at the boy again. There was something in those young eyes, something he recognized. He had seen it once before, a long time ago, when he looked in the mirror as a child. It was the look of someone who didn't just want to play music. It was the look of someone who needed to. "1 minute," Mr. Lawrence said quietly. "You can play for 1 minute." The woman's mouth opened in shock. "Sir, you don't have to do that. Really. We should go." But the boy was already moving. He slipped free from his mother's hand and walked toward the piano like he was being pulled by an invisible string. He climbed onto the bench, his feet barely reaching the pedals. His small hands hovered over the black and white keys. The lobby seemed to go quiet. A few people nearby glanced over, curious. The woman stood frozen, her hands clasped together, her face a mixture of fear and hope. Mr. Lawrence stepped back and folded his arms. He expected the boy to press a few keys randomly, maybe play a simple tune he had seen on the internet. Something cute and childish. What he didn't expect was what happened next. The boy closed his eyes. He took a slow breath, and then his fingers touched the keys, and the whole world changed. The first note hit the air like a whisper. Soft, gentle, almost shy. But then came the second note, and the third. And suddenly the whisper turned into something much bigger. The boy's small fingers moved across the keys with a speed and grace that didn't make sense. His hands looked too tiny, too young, too untrained, but they danced over the piano like they had been doing this for 100 years. Mr. Lawrence felt his breath catch in his throat. The piece the boy was playing wasn't some simple children's song. It wasn't "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star" or "Mary Had a Little Lamb." It was Chopin. One of the most difficult compositions ever written for piano. A piece that took trained musicians years to master. A piece that Mr. Lawrence himself had struggled with when he was studying at the conservatory decades ago. And this child, this 7-year-old boy in worn-out shoes and a faded t-shirt, was playing it like it was the easiest thing in the world. The lobby fell completely silent. A businessman who had been rushing toward the elevator stopped in his tracks. His briefcase slipped from his hand, but he didn't notice. A couple sitting on the couch nearby turned around, their coffee forgotten. A woman who had been complaining loudly at the front desk went quiet mid-sentence. Even the hotel staff stopped what they were doing and stared. Mr. Lawrence couldn't move. He stood there, frozen, watching the boy's fingers fly across the black and white keys. Every note was perfect. Every pause was intentional. The music wasn't just correct. It was alive. It breathed. It told a story of sadness and hope and longing, all wrapped together in a melody that seemed to reach inside your chest and squeeze your heart. This wasn't just talent. This was something else entirely. Something rare. Something that came along maybe once in a generation. The boy's mother stood a few feet away, her hands pressed against her mouth. Tears were streaming down her cheeks, but she didn't wipe them away. She just watched her son, her little Tommy, creating sounds she had never heard him make before. She had known he loved music. She had seen him tap rhythms on the kitchen table, hum melodies while doing his homework, sit for hours watching piano videos on her cracked phone screen. But she had never heard him actually play. She had never been able to afford a piano, never been able to give him lessons, and yet here he was, playing like he had been born for it. The music swelled, filling every corner of the grand lobby. It bounced off the marble floors and the high ceilings. It wrapped around the golden chandeliers and the tall glass windows. People began to gather, stepping closer to the piano, drawn by the sound like moths to a flame. Mr. Lawrence felt something wet on his cheek. He reached up and realized he was crying too. In all his years of playing, in all his travels around the world, he had heard many talented musicians. He had shared stages with prodigies and masters. But this was different. This boy wasn't just playing notes on a page. He was speaking through the piano. He was telling his story without saying a single word. The piece built to its climax, the notes coming faster and faster, the emotion growing stronger and stronger. The boy's eyes were still closed. His face was calm, almost peaceful, like he was somewhere far away, like the rest of the world had disappeared and it was just him and the music. And then, with one final, powerful chord, the piece ended. The last note hung in the air for a long moment, vibrating, echoing, slowly fading into silence. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. For what felt like forever, the entire lobby just stood there, frozen in place, like time itself had stopped. Then someone started clapping. It was the businessman who had dropped his briefcase. He clapped slowly at first, his hands coming together in a daze. Then the couple on the couch joined in. Then the woman at the front desk. Then everyone. The applause grew louder and louder, filling the lobby with sound. People were cheering. Some were wiping tears from their eyes. Strangers were looking at each other in disbelief, shaking their heads, trying to understand what they had just witnessed. The boy opened his eyes. He looked around at all the people clapping, and for the first time, he looked like the child he was. Confused, shy, a little embarrassed, he glanced at his mother, and when he saw the tears on her face, his own eyes filled with worry. "Mama, why are you crying? Did I do something wrong?" His mother let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. She rushed forward and pulled him into her arms, holding him so tight it looked like she would never let go. "No, baby," she whispered into his hair. "You didn't do anything wrong. You did something beautiful." Mr. Lawrence still hadn't moved. He was staring at the boy, his mind racing, his heart pounding. In all his years, he had never seen anything like this. Natural talent existed. Yes, but this wasn't just natural talent. This was extraordinary. This was the kind of gift that changed lives. He walked slowly toward the boy and knelt down so they were at eye level. The mother loosened her grip but kept her hands on her son's shoulders, protective and watchful. "Young man," Mr. Lawrence said, his voice unsteady. "Where did you learn to play like that?" The boy shrugged. It was such a simple, innocent gesture. "I don't know," he said. "I just watch videos. And I remember." "You remember?" "Yeah. I watch the videos. And I see how their fingers move. And then I hear the music in my head. And when I close my eyes, I can see the piano. And I just play. I watch the videos." Mr. Lawrence shook his head slowly. He had heard of people like this before. People who could watch something once and remember it perfectly. People whose brains worked differently than everyone else's, but he had never actually met one. He had always thought they were just stories. "How long have you been doing this?" he asked. The boy thought about it. "I don't remember." "A long time. But Mama doesn't have a piano. So I just practice on the table. Or in my head." Mr. Lawrence turned to look at the mother. She was still crying silently, but there was something else in her eyes now. Fear. The fear of a woman who had spent her whole life trying to survive, who knew that good things didn't come without a price. "Please, sir," she said quietly. "I hope he didn't damage anything. The piano looks very expensive. If there's any trouble, I'll work extra shifts to pay for it. Please don't report us to the manager." Mr. Lawrence felt his heart break a little. Here was a child with a gift that most people could only dream of. A gift that could fill concert halls and move thousands of people to tears. and his mother was worried about losing her job for letting him touch a piano. "There's no trouble," Mr. Lawrence said gently. "No trouble at all." He stood up and looked around the lobby. The crowd was still gathered, still buzzing with excitement. Some people had their phones out, and he realized they had been recording. The video of this boy would probably be on the internet by tonight. The thought made him uneasy. He had seen what the world did to prodigies, how it used them up and threw them away. But he also knew that talent like this couldn't stay hidden forever. He looked back at the boy, who was now holding his mother's hand, looking small and uncertain again. "What's your name?" Mr. Lawrence asked. "Tommy," the boy said. "Tommy." Mr. Lawrence nodded slowly. "That was the most beautiful thing I've heard in 20 years. Do you understand that?" The boy shook his head. He didn't understand. How could he? He was just a child who loved music. But Mr. Lawrence understood. And he knew that after today, nothing would ever be the same. He just didn't know yet how right he was. The crowd in the lobby slowly began to scatter. People returned to their conversations, their phones, their lives. But the energy in the room had changed. There was a lightness in the air that hadn't been there before. Strangers were smiling at each other. A few people walked past Tommy and patted him on the shoulder, telling him he was amazing. The boy didn't know how to respond. He just nodded shyly and stayed close to his mother. Mr. Lawrence was about to say something more when he heard footsteps approaching. Fast, heavy footsteps. He turned and saw exactly who he expected to see. Mr. Daniels, the hotel manager. He was a tall man with a thin face and cold eyes. He wore an expensive suit and walked like he owned the place, which, in a way, he did. At least, he acted like it. He had been the manager of the Riverside Hotel for 8 years, and in that time, he had built a reputation for being strict, efficient, and completely without warmth. He stopped a few feet away from the piano, his eyes moving from Mr. Lawrence to the boy to the mother. His expression was hard to read, but it wasn't friendly. "What's going on here?" he asked. His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it. Tommy's mother immediately stepped forward, pulling her son behind her like a shield. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Daniels," she said quickly. "It won't happen again. My son just wandered out here while I was working. He didn't mean any harm. Please, I'll make sure it never happens again." Mr. Daniels looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Tommy, who was peeking out from behind his mother's leg. "Your son touched the piano," Mr. Daniels said. "It wasn't a question." "Yes, sir, but only for a minute." Mr. Lawrence gave him permission. "I'm sorry. I know it was wrong." Mr. Lawrence stepped forward. "It was my idea," he said firmly. "I told the boy he could play. If there's anyone to blame, it's me." Mr. Daniels raised an eyebrow. "You let a housekeeper's child play the hotel's grand piano?" "I did. That piano cost more than most people make in 5 years, Lawrence." "I'm aware." The two men stared at each other. There was a tension between them, something old and unspoken. Mr. Lawrence had never liked the manager. He found him cold and unkind, the type of man who saw everything in terms of money and rules. But he had always kept his opinions to himself. Until now. "The boy is talented," Mr. Lawrence said. "More talented than anyone I've ever heard. And I've heard a lot of people play." Mr. Daniels let out a short, dry laugh. "Talented? He's a child. He probably banged on the keys for 30 seconds. And you're calling him talented?" He played Chopin's Ballade No. 1, from memory, flawlessly. For the first time, something flickered in Mr. Daniels' eyes. Surprise. Maybe. Or disbelief. "That's impossible," he said. "I thought so too, but I was standing right here. I heard every note." Mr. Daniels looked at Tommy again. The boy stared back at him with those big, serious eyes. He didn't look scared. He didn't look nervous. He just looked like a kid who wanted to understand what the adults were talking about. "Is this true?" Mr. Daniels asked him directly. "You played Chopin?" Tommy nodded. "I don't know who that is, but I played the song I saw on the video, the sad one with the fast parts in the middle." Mr. Daniels was quiet for a moment. Then he shook his head. "I don't have time for this," he said. He turned to Tommy's mother. You. What's your name? Grace, sir. Grace Chen. Grace, you've worked here for how long? 3 years. Sir. And in those 3 years, have you ever brought your child into the guest areas? Grace shook her head quickly. No, sir. Never. He usually stays in the break room. Today was a mistake. It won't happen again. Mr. Daniels nodded slowly. See that it doesn't. I'll let it go this time. But if I catch your son out here again, there will be consequences. Understood? Grace nodded, her face pale. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Mr. Daniels gave one last look at the piano, as if checking for damage, then turned and walked away without another word. The moment he was gone, Grace let out a long breath. Her hands were shaking. She looked down at Tommy and tried to smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. Come on, baby, she said softly. Let's go back inside. Mama still has work to do. She took his hand and started to lead him away. But before they could take more than a few steps, Mr. Lawrence called out, Wait. Grace stopped and turned around. There was fear in her eyes again, like she was waiting for more bad news. Mr. Lawrence walked toward them slowly. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small card. It was old and slightly worn at the edges, but the words on it were still clear. This is my personal number, he said, handing the card to Grace. I want you to call me. Tonight. If possible. Grace looked at the card like it might bite her. Why? Because your son has a gift, a real gift. The kind of gift that shouldn't be wasted. And I might know some people who can help. Grace shook her head. Sir, I appreciate your kindness. I really do. But we can't afford piano lessons. We can barely afford rent. I work double shifts just to keep food on the table. I can't take on anything else. I'm not asking you to pay for anything, Mr. Lawrence said gently. Just call me. Let me explain. That's all I ask. And create. Create. Grace looked at him for a long moment. There was doubt in her eyes, but also something else. A tiny spark of hope that she was trying very hard not to feel. Why would you help us? She asked quietly. You don't even know us. Mr. Lawrence smiled. It was a sad smile. The kind that comes from years of experience and loss. Because a long time ago, someone helped me, he said. I was just like your son. Poor, unknown, no connections. But someone saw something in me and gave me a chance. That chance changed my whole life. And I've been waiting for years to do the same for someone else. He looked down at Tommy, who was watching him with those deep, curious eyes. Your son reminded me of why I fell in love with music in the first place, Mr. Lawrence continued. That's worth more than you know. Grace's eyes filled with tears again. She looked at the card in her hand, then at her son, then at Mr. Lawrence. I don't know what to say, she whispered. You don't have to say anything. Just call me. She nodded slowly. Then, without another word, she tucked the card into her pocket, took Tommy's hand, and walked away. Mr. Lawrence watched them go until they disappeared through the staff door. Then he turned back to the piano. The lobby was quiet now. The afternoon light was fading, turning the golden patterns on the floor into soft shadows. He sat down on the bench and placed his hands on the keys. For a moment, he just sat there, thinking about what had just happened, thinking about the boy, thinking about the music. Then he began to play. It was the same piece Tommy had played, Chopin's Ballade, No. 1. But as Mr. Lawrence played it, he realized something strange. It didn't sound the same. It was technically correct. Every note was in place. Every rhythm was perfect. But it didn't have the same feeling. It didn't have that raw, honest emotion that the boy had poured into every single note. Mr. Lawrence stopped playing and stared at the keys. For the first time in a very long time, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. He felt humbled, and he knew, deep in his heart, that he had just met someone who could change the world. All he had to do was make sure the world didn't crush him first. Grace didn't call that night. She wanted to. She sat on the edge of her bed, in their tiny one-bedroom apartment, holding the small card in her hands, staring at the numbers written on it. Tommy was asleep in the next room, curled up on the pull-out couch that served as his bed. The apartment was quiet except for the sound of traffic outside and the dripping of the kitchen faucet that she kept meaning to fix but never had time for. She turned the card over and over in her fingers. Part of her wanted to believe that Mr. Lawrence was telling the truth, that he really wanted to help, that this could be the chance she had been praying for. But another part of her, the part that had been disappointed too many times, was afraid. She had learned a long time ago that good things didn't happen to people like her. She had grown up poor. She had dropped out of high school when she got pregnant at 17. Tommy's father had left before the baby was even born, and she had been on her own ever since. Every day was a fight. A fight to pay rent. A fight to keep food on the table. A fight to give her son a life better than the one she had. And now some stranger was offering to help. Just like that, no strings attached. It seemed too good to be true. And in Grace's experience, things that seemed too good to be true usually were. So she put the card in her drawer and went to sleep. But she couldn't stop thinking about it. The next morning, while she was getting Tommy ready for school, he asked her a question that broke her heart. "Mama, do you think I'll ever get to play a piano again?" She looked at him. He was sitting at the small kitchen table, eating a bowl of cereal, his feet swinging back and forth because they didn't reach the floor. He looked so small. So hopeful. "I don't know, baby," she said softly. "Maybe someday." Tommy nodded and went back to eating. He didn't complain. He never complained. That was the thing about her son. He never asked for toys, or games, or expensive things. He never threw tantrums in stores or begged for things they couldn't afford. The only thing he ever wanted was music. And it was the one thing she couldn't give him. That afternoon, during her lunch break at the hotel, Grace made a decision. She pulled out the card and dialed the number. Mr. Lawrence answered on the second ring. "Hello? Hi, this is Grace." "From the hotel." "The housekeeper. My son played your piano yesterday." There was a pause. And then Mr. Lawrence's voice came through, warm and relieved. "Grace, I'm so glad you called. I was hoping you would." "I almost didn't," she admitted. "I'm still not sure why I am." "That's okay. I understand. This must all feel very sudden." "It does." She took a deep breath. "Look, I don't want to waste your time. I don't have money. I can't afford lessons or instruments or any of that. So if that's what this is about, I should just tell you now." "It's not about money," Mr. Lawrence said. "Can we meet? Somewhere quiet. I'd like to explain everything in person." Grace hesitated. "I don't know. I have to work. And I don't have anyone to watch Tommy after school." "Bring him with you. In fact, I'd like him to be there. There's someone I want him to meet." That evening, after her shift ended, Grace took Tommy to a small coffee shop a few blocks from the hotel. It was a quiet place with wooden tables and soft music playing in the background. Mr. Lawrence was already there when they arrived. But he wasn't alone. Sitting across from him was a woman Grace had never seen before. She was older, maybe in her 60s, with silver hair pulled back in an elegant bun. She wore a simple black dress and pearls around her neck. Everything about her looked expensive, from her shoes to her posture. But her eyes were kind. Mr. Lawrence stood up when he saw them. "Grace. Tommy. Thank you for coming." He gestured to the woman beside him. "This is Mrs. Whitman. She's an old friend of mine. And she runs one of the most respected music academies in the country." Grace felt her stomach drop. This was too much. This was way too much. "Please, sit down," Mrs. Whitman said. Her voice was soft but commanding. "I've heard a lot about your son." Grace sat down slowly, pulling Tommy onto the chair beside her. The boy was quiet, looking around the coffee shop with wide eyes. Mrs. Whitman studied him for a moment. Then she smiled. "So you're the young man who played Chopin in a hotel lobby," she said. "That's quite a story." Tommy looked at his mother, unsure what to say. Grace nodded at him. "Yes, ma'am," Tommy said quietly. "I like that song. It sounds like rain and thunder and being sad but also being okay. Mrs. Whitman's eyebrows rose. She glanced at Mr. Lawrence, who nodded slightly. That's a very poetic way to describe it, she said. Most adults don't hear music that way. They hear notes and chords. But you hear feelings. That's rare. Runtime. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small tablet. She tapped the screen a few times and then turned it toward Grace. Someone recorded your son's performance yesterday. It's been shared quite a bit online. Grace leaned forward and looked at the screen. It was a video of Tommy playing the piano. The quality wasn't great. Clearly filmed on someone's phone. But the sound was clear enough. She watched her son's small fingers move across the keys, watched the expressions on the faces of the people around him, watched herself crying in the background. The video had over 200,000 views. Grace felt dizzy. I didn't know about this, she whispered. Neither did I, until this morning, Mr. Lawrence said. But it doesn't matter. What matters is what we do next. Mrs. Whitman leaned forward. Grace, I'll be direct with you. I've been in music education for over 40 years. I've trained students who went on to play in the greatest concert halls in the world. And I can tell you, without any doubt, that your son has something special. Something extraordinary. Grace shook her head. He's never had a lesson. He just watches videos. I know. That's what makes it even more remarkable. Mrs. Whitman paused. I'd like to offer Tommy a full scholarship to my academy. Tuition, books, instruments, everything. Completely free. The words hung in the air. Grace stared at her. What? A full scholarship. He would start next semester. We have dormitories. But given his age, I'd prefer if he stayed with you. We can arrange transportation. We can work around your schedule. Whatever it takes. Grace's hands were shaking. She looked at Mr. Lawrence, then at Mrs. Whitman, then at Tommy. Why? She asked. Why would you do this for us? Mrs. Whitman smiled gently. Because talent, like your son's, doesn't come along very often. Maybe once in a generation. And when it does, it's our responsibility to nurture it, to protect it, to help it grow. She reached across the table and took Grace's hand. Your son could change the world with his music, but only if he gets the chance. Grace couldn't speak. Tears were rolling down her cheeks. Tommy tugged at her sleeve. Mama? Why are you crying again? She let out a small laugh and pulled him into a hug. Because I'm happy, baby. I'm so happy. Mr. Lawrence watched them with a soft smile. He had seen many things in his life. Triumphs and failures. Joy and heartbreak. But this moment, right here, was something he would never forget. A mother who had spent her whole life struggling. A boy who had a gift he didn't even understand. And a door that was finally opening. Tommy looked up from his mother's arms. Does this mean I get to play piano every day? He asked. Mrs. Whitman laughed. Yes, young man, every single day. Tommy's face broke into the biggest smile any of them had ever seen. And in that small coffee shop, with the evening light fading outside the window, something beautiful began. A dream that had been waiting in silence was finally given a voice. And nothing would ever be the same again. 4 years passed. 4 years of early mornings and late nights. 4 years of practice and lessons and performances. 4 years of watching a shy little boy grow into a confident young musician. Tommy was 11 now. He was taller. His face a little longer. His hands bigger. But his eyes were still the same. Deep and serious and full of that quiet fire that had been there since the very beginning. He stood backstage at the Kingston Concert Hall, one of the most famous music venues in the country. The same stage where legends had performed, the same stage where careers had been made, and tonight, it was his turn. Through the thick velvet curtains, he could hear the audience. Thousands of people, filling every seat, waiting to hear him play. He had performed many times over the past 4 years, at recitals and competitions and small concerts. But nothing like this. Nothing even close to this. His hands were shaking. A gentle touch on his shoulder made him turn around. It was his mother. Grace looked different now. She still had the same kind eyes and warm smile, but the exhaustion that had once lived on her face was gone. She no longer worked double shifts at the hotel. She no longer worried about rent or food or whether she could afford to keep the lights on. Mrs. Whitman had helped her find a better job, one with normal hours and good pay. For the first time in her life, Grace could breathe. But more than that, she could watch her son fly. "How are you feeling?" she asked softly. Tommy looked at her. "Scared," he admitted. Grace smiled and knelt down, so they were at eye level, just like she used to do when he was small. "Do you remember what you told me once? When you were 7 years old and you played that piano in the hotel lobby?" Tommy shook his head. "You said the music talks to you. You said when you close your eyes, you can see the piano in your head. You said the notes tell you where to go." She took his hands in hers. "That hasn't changed, baby. The music is still inside you. It always has been. All you have to do is let it out." Tommy looked down at their hands. His were almost as big as hers now. But when she held them, he still felt like that little boy standing beside the grand piano, asking if he could play for just a moment. "What if I mess up?" he whispered. "Then you mess up, and it's okay. Because no matter what happens out there, I'm proud of you. I've been proud of you since the day you were born." Tommy felt his eyes sting. He blinked hard and nodded. "Thanks, Mama." She kissed his forehead and stood up. "Now go show them who you are." A stagehand appeared and gestured toward the curtain. It was time. Tommy took a deep breath. He straightened his jacket. The same black jacket Mrs. Whitman had bought him for his first recital 4 years ago. It barely fit anymore, but he refused to wear anything else for important performances. It was his good luck charm. He walked toward the stage. The curtains parted, and the light hit him like a wave. For a moment, he couldn't see anything. Just bright white light and the sound of applause. Then, his eyes adjusted, and he saw them. Thousands of faces, looking at him, waiting for him. He walked slowly toward the grand piano in the center of the stage. It was beautiful, black and shining under the spotlights. He had played many pianos over the years, but this one was special. This was the same model as the one in the hotel lobby, the one where everything had started. He sat down on the bench. The applause faded into silence. In the front row, he could see his mother. She was sitting next to Mrs. Whitman, who had become like a grandmother to him over the years. And beside them, in the seat closest to the aisle, was Mr. Lawrence. The old pianist looked different now. His hair was whiter, his face more lined. He had retired from the hotel last year, his hands finally too stiff to play for long periods, but he had never missed one of Tommy's performances. Not a single one. Their eyes met across the distance. Mr. Lawrence gave him a small nod, just a tiny movement of his head. But Tommy understood what it meant. "You can do this. I believe in you." Tommy turned back to the piano. He placed his hands on the keys. They were cool and smooth under his fingers, familiar as old friends. The concert hall was completely silent. 2,000 people, holding their breath. Tommy closed his eyes, and he began to play. The first notes were soft, gentle, like a whisper in an empty room. But slowly, gradually, they grew. The melody built and swelled, filling the concert hall with sound. It wrapped around the audience like a warm blanket, pulling them in, holding them close. Tommy played the same piece he had played 4 years ago in that hotel lobby, Chopin's Ballet No. 1. But it was different now. Deeper. Richer. He had learned so much since then. He understood the music in ways he hadn't before. He knew its history, its structure, its secrets. But more than that, he knew himself. He knew the pain of growing up without a father. He knew the love of a mother who sacrificed everything for him. He knew what it felt like to be invisible, to be overlooked, to be told he didn't belong. And he knew what it felt like to be given a chance when he had almost given up hope. All of that went into the music. Every note carried a piece of his story. Every chord held a memory. He wasn't just playing a song, He was telling the world who he was. The audience sat frozen. Some had tears streaming down their faces. Others had their hands pressed over their hearts. No one moved. No one spoke. They just listened. In the front row, Grace was crying. Not sad tears. Happy tears. Proud tears. The tears of a mother watching her child become something greater than she ever imagined. Mrs. Whitman was smiling, her eyes bright with emotion. She had seen many talented students in her life, but none quite like this. None who played with such raw, honest feeling. And Mr. Lawrence, the old pianist who had started it all with a simple act of kindness, sat with his eyes closed, letting the music wash over him. He remembered that Thursday afternoon 4 years ago, the small boy in worn clothes, the quiet question, the moment he almost said no. He was so glad he hadn't. The music reached its climax. The notes came faster and faster, building to a peak that seemed to shake the very walls of the concert hall. And then, with one final, thundering chord, it was over. Silence, for one heartbeat, 2, 3, and then the audience exploded. People leaped to their feet. The applause was deafening, a roar of sound that filled every corner of the hall. People were cheering, shouting, clapping so hard their hands hurt. Some were crying openly, others were laughing with pure joy. Tommy stood up from the bench. He looked out at the sea of faces, at the standing ovation, at the lights and the noise and the overwhelming wave of love washing over him. He found his mother in the crowd. She was on her feet, clapping harder than anyone, tears streaming down her smiling face. He found Mr. Lawrence, who was standing too, his old hands coming together slowly, his eyes shining with pride. Tommy smiled. 4 years ago, he had been a poor kid with a dream and no way to reach it. He had stood beside a piano in a hotel lobby and asked a stranger for just one moment. One moment. That was all it had taken to change everything. He bowed deeply to the audience. The applause went on, filling the night with sound. And somewhere in that beautiful noise, Tommy could still hear the music. It had always been there, waiting for him. And now, finally, the whole world could hear it too.